public input meeting regarding phase 2 of the concrete or asphalt batch plants. There's a split screen, you'll notice. There'll be a side-by-side presentation in Spanish, and then I'll show you in just a minute where the captions are. If you should need a different language other than what we have. So at the bottom left of your screen, you should have a little symbol that looks similar to what's shown here. Those are your captions. You just click on that and then choose the language of your preference. So again, this is the third meeting. We had 3 meetings, and this is the last of the public input meetings. We had a public meeting on November 28th and the 29th. And so I'm just going to try to go fairly quickly through our update on what happened in phase 1. And then we'll try to get into a lot more of the meat of what we're here for today, and that's to learn about the draft regulations, and then of course the most important, we were doing this to get your public input, and we'd like a discussion regarding any comments you have or any questions, and then we'll just do some staff closing comments from there. So this morning, we do have Andrea Gillis, our Assistant Director of Planning and Urban Design, online. And we have Mike King online as well. He's our host, handling our meeting for us. And Mike will also be the one who will keep an eye out for someone speaking toward the end of the presentation when we open it up for public discussion. And he'll give you the permissions to speak. My name is Lori Levy, and I'm also in Planning and Urban Design, and I will be presenting today's meeting. Okay, so just a little bit of background for anyone who hasn't been able to follow the concrete and asphalt batch plant code amendment. It started last year, toward the end of last year. We, excuse me, our planning and urban design staff received a request from Councilmember Blackman, who is our chair of the Environment and Sustainability Committee. And we were tasked with coming up with strategies to effectively address the batch plants. And that's mainly, that was mainly to address the adjacency issues and compatibility issues with respect to sensitive land uses. So after that, shortly after that, we prepared a memo that was laying out our approach, which was a 2-phased approach that we presented to our Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee. That we're required to bring any code amendment forward to our Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee, who makes recommendations. And then after, we also forwarded that phase 1 recommendation onto, with ZOAC's recommendation, onto CPC, which is our City Plan Commission, as required. And then we forwarded that recommendation on to our City Council, who approved phase 1 of the 2-phased approach for the batch plants. And that required, put in place a requirement that all temporary or permanent batch plants come through with a zoning request, basically in the form of a specific use permit, which is we refer to as an SUP also. In September, just a few months ago, staff presented a draft batch plant interactive map that we'll be using to, internally to track the batch plants and, check some distances and other requirements. But we did present that draft, and we're continuing that forward as well. So again, why are we doing the code amendment? The code amendment is to address a main goal from our Environmental and Climate Action Plan called CCAP. That's what we refer to it as, with the main goal of ensuring that these new facilities are an appropriate distance away from neighborhoods. Any new industries coming in, we want to make sure that they are compatible and appropriately located. So again, the main, one of the main factors addressing is to protect the sensitive land uses of residents or residential parks and schools. So another big factor in this is to address and improve the public health and air quality. And then, of course, while doing so, we still are trying to provide appropriate locations for these very necessary industries, meaning the batch plant operations that are necessary for infrastructure for our projects. This is just showing one of the Dallas batch plants. It's kind of a, typical equipment, if you will, and I have them labeled of, you have the feed hopper, the conveyor belt, and then your elevated storage bins and your sand and aggregate piles, excuse me. This is, the typical equipment and, kind of what one would look like if, in case you're not familiar with the batch plant. Here's another batch plant, and as you can see, some of these are fairly close to residential. There's residential right across the street. So that's just, again, just showing, some examples of these batch plants that we have, excuse me, in Dallas that are existing. Another facility, again, this is, I want to say it's closer to Love Field, but again, as you can see, there's quite a bit of residential, all right across the street. So again, just another example. Another one here, this is near or in very, very close to Joppy neighborhood. Okay, so again, what occurred? Again, we had a few two-phased approach, or a phase two. Two-phased approach, and we've already taken care of phase one, and that was to we did that quickly and split it up into a two-phase approach so that we could immediately address the lack of a public process for the for the concrete batch plants. What we had in place before was a by right approval process where they could just go to building inspection and basically get a permit if some elements were followed. So we removed the by right approval process for the temporary batch plants, for all batch plants. We added the specific use permit SUP process that requires public hearings at both City Plan Commission and City Council, as part of a zoning change, basically. So we're here right now, phase two. We have draft new regulations, and after conducting a very comprehensive review of the batch plants and industrial uses, and with a lot of public input, this is a follow-up series to previous public input meetings we had, and I know many of you are aware of that because you participated. But we're going to go through that and see basically what your comments were, what the issues were and what the suggestions were, and then, what staff is recommending in response to that. But again, a comprehensive approach is what we took. we had a series of a lot of meetings. We still have a couple of follow-up meetings with some of the industries next week. So we're kind of finalizing those, but we had a lot of input, of course, from our internal departments because there's so many departments that have a role in, in the whole process, start to finish. So, of course, we met with current planning out of PUD, our building inspections group who issues permits, our OEQS, which is our environmental quality department, who has a large role in the batch plants as well, especially on the stormwater side. We met with code compliance, again, stormwater management, public works, transportation, many other groups that aren't listed. Those meetings are still, we're still meeting internally, of course. We did develop an internal checklist that will be required at zoning intake for any of the batch plants that will still be required to have a specific use permit or an SUP. And that will be, won't be necessarily part of these regulations, but it will be, it'll go a long way in handling the checks and balances for what the ultimate regulations are that are put into place. So, this is really showing, again, linearly, basically what came out of the series of public meetings that we had several months ago. And so some of the issues for sensitive land use basically came out as batch plants are located next to residential, including multifamily. That was, we heard a lot of that. That was a large concern. Some of the suggestions were that batch plants should not be allowed in residential neighborhoods. So draft recommendations at this point, and this is staff draft recommendations. I do want to go ahead and emphasize that these still have to go forward to all of the public hearings. But so permanent batch plants only allowed in the IM industrial manufacturing district with an approved specific use permit or an SUP. That's as far as the zoning. Temporary batch plants only allowed in residential districts if the plant is serving construction or partial reconstruction of a residential site or with an approved SUP if it's temporary offsite. So different categories for temporary batch plants. And then temporary batch plants only allowed in, actually this is changed, but temporary batch plants are really only allowed in the non-residential districts, again, unless they're serving construction or partial reconstruction of a residential site. Also, another concern, of course, we had heard was our children. Children are playing at the soccer complex within 300 feet of an existing batch plant. We also, so we heard a lot about, what distances are acceptable or appropriate. We heard suggestions of 440 yards, which TCEQ requires. That's the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, our state regulators who regulate the permits, the air permits for the batch plants as one layer. They don't control, of course, the city regulations, but they do have some regulations in place. And so the 440 yards or 1,320 feet is only a requirement by TCEQ if a city does not have their own zoning regulations. So, we heard that's a good place to start. Maybe we could build on that. It should be at least that quarter mile, distance. And again, TCEQ dictates the 1,320 20 feet from residential if a municipality does not have their own zoning regulations. We heard no batch plants allowed to locate side by side, and next to each other. 1,500 feet minimum distance is used in some of our other ordinances, like the gas drilling ordinance, so maybe that's appropriate in this application as well. So we were basically, for the most part, hearing anywhere from, somewhere in the range of 1,300 feet to 1,500 feet might be appropriate for permanent batch plants. And then, we also heard that maybe there should be a cap on the number of batch plants per residential area, or a minimum distance between existing batch plants and new batch plants. Regarding the distance, we did hear also from some that the 1,500-foot distance is arbitrary and should not be predetermined, that it would prohibit most batch plants, and it would put most concrete trucks on the road, contributing to more emissions and traffic. So, a lot of discussion regarding that. So staff draft recommendations is that the distances from residential structure and or a residential district, a public school or a public park, and from another batch plant, and that's permanent. That last part, distance between an existing permanent batch plant and another existing batch plant, is only that part only comes into play for permanent batch plants and then temporary offsite. So again, I'll discuss that a little further here. So for our permanent batch plants, we have three categories basically, or uses, specific uses that we're recommending under permanent batch plants. And one is a concrete or asphalt batch plant. And we're recommending that distance to be 1,640 feet from the residential structures and or residential zoning districts, public schools or public parks, and from another existing batch plant. Another use category is alternative green concrete batch plant under the permanent category. And, that's a little bit more environmentally friendly type of process. We're recommending 1,320 feet from the sensitive land uses, meaning the residential zoning district, residence, public school, or public park. And then that same distance between an existing batch plant of that kind. So a concrete or asphalt recycling facility, permanent, of course, also falls under the permanent batch plant land use. And we're recommending 3,281 feet from the sensitive land uses and between each facility. For the temporary category, that's a little different. If it's temporary off-site, it would be the same distance, the 1,640 feet for the concrete or asphalt batch plants. And that's between, for sensitive land use and between each of the batch plants. 330 feet distance from the sensitive land uses only, basically. And that would be if it's on site, meaning it's on the actual lot or site where the construction is taking place that necessitates that batch plant, basically. Or 330 feet also from the sensitive land uses if it's a batch plant in our right of way. And then for the alternative green concrete batch plant offsite, again, it would be 1,640 feet, whether it be sensitive land use or between another facility, or 330 feet for on-site and in the right of way. And then, of course, we don't really have a concrete or asphalt recycling facility that's temporary. That's a permanent type of use. Equity issues. We heard a lot of, there was a lot of discussion. We heard a lot of input regarding equity. And what we heard was that there are a large concentration of the concrete and asphalt batch plants in the black and brown communities. So, we heard that West Dallas is the most populated, zip code basically in Dallas, and has and contains the most batch plants. Um, and so, and then some of them are right next to multifamily. We heard a lot of that. Some suggestions from the input was that public input was batch plants should not be allowed in residential neighborhoods. They shouldn't be allowed to locate side by side next to each other, basically. Separate batch plants from residential uses, not just areas zoned for residential. Meaning, if you have a residential structure or residential use, but maybe it's not zoned residential, there should be some separation. So draft recommendations, staff right now is permanent batch plants. Again, they're only allowed in the IM industrial zoning district with an SUP. They're not allowed in IR industrial research district anymore. So there's a lot of land that's zoned, especially in these areas, that is zoned IR right now, industrial research. So that will take a lot of that. That'll address some of those equity issues, certainly. Permanent batch plants are only allowed, I'm sorry, just to reiterate. So permanent batch plants can only locate in the IM industrial manufacturing district with an approved SUP, meaning, the public process where ultimately the city council will, excuse me, decide or, provide that final action decision of whether or not that use is appropriate in that district. Temporary batch plants only allowed in residential districts, again, when serving that residential construction or partial reconstruction, and then, more than likely with an SUP if it's temporary offsite. Distances from residential district, again, this is just, again, repeating what we have for the distances. So, with these different elements, we feel that it does address some of the equity issues. Now, we did also hear that the city allowed the batch plant uses through zoning and land use that facilitated some of this equity, some of the equity issues, and allowed them in the black and brown communities. We also heard for a suggestion, though, in response to that appropriate areas need to be addressed through our Forward Dallas, which is our comprehensive plan and land use map, and then update the zoning from there, and do not hesitate to rezone. So Forward Dallas, the comprehensive plan, is ongoing right now. And I know there have been a lot of public meetings, and, some of you may have participated, hopefully, and are still participating in those discussions. It is on our website where you can make comments, but that is in progress now. So land use will be addressed. But this is a code amendment, so this is a little bit different. This is addressed through our regulations, our zoning regulations, basically, that are in our Dallas Development Code, that are for land uses, if you will, to follow. So it's not under the purview of this code amendment, but I did want to let you know that that is being looked at. It's just a different process. It's a different component. We have our land use map and we have our comprehensive plan, which guides these zoning decisions. So that is being handled through another format. TCEQ and city regulations, there was a lot of issues brought up with that too, of course. One of them, and what are the issues that TCEQ cannot consider concentration of batch plants in the particulate matter. Um, and I'll explain that in a minute, but in that TCEQ standards are not strict. So the TCEQ regulations, they they really don't measure right now, or um, they don't measure the cumulative impact of the emissions when you have, two or three batch plants located or concentrated in an area, is basically what that is saying. And part of it right now is what I'm seeing is their definition for a site is a little bit different than ours. And so you can actually have, two or three batch plants on one parcel, basically, because as far as TCEQ regulations, because they basically define a site, or the same site area as the same operator, under the same ownership or operator. So it's not necessarily the confines of, a legal description of a piece of land. So suggestions we heard: no batch plants allowed to locate side by side. Again, the cap on the number of plants for residential area, or a minimum distance between the existing and new facilities. Distance requirements, again, starting, with at 1,320 feet and maybe going from there. So recommendations, staff recommendations on this: no more than one batch plant allowed on a site area or lot area. So that's one thing. And again, that doesn't mean, ownership of a parcel. That means the actual legal description, those property boundaries. So a little bit different. So you can only have one, per lot or site area. Another thing is the distance requirements between the permanent and temporary for offsite batch plants. So for the most part, it's between the permanent batch plants. So you have both of those, so that if you do have a lot that's, owned by the same operator that is next to, it, one, consecutively next to each other or immediately adjacent, you have the no more than one batch plant allowed, but you also have the distance separation that has to be in place as well. Distance requirements, again, I went over that. And I think I did forget to mention that the distance requirements that we're proposing came from the guidance of the EPA, Environmental Protection Act. They have guidance on distance separation between industrial land uses and sensitive uses. And so that's been amended. The first one was in 1986. It's been amended several times over, but they include risk factors and other, data that they have. And so that's another element that we were using to come up with those appropriate distances. TCEQ and city regulations, again, we heard, of course, the concrete and materials need to be close to projects they serve. Their batch plants have already been studied by TCEQ. They have, they're actually undergoing their rulemaking right now, but to address any changes that might be necessary for air quality. But regulations by a municipality are duplicative and confusing with TCEQ regulations. TCEQ has oversight based on modeling. The 440 yards was established by TCEQ and not based on scientific data. Phase 1 requirements are onerous for temporary batch plants. Timing is of the essence, and potential for construction delays. Suggestions would be that TCEQ should be the main regulator, maybe not the city. So in response, the temporary batch plans, again, we definitely don't want project delays. We just want to have appropriate regulations in place to protect the land uses, the sensitive land uses. So we don't want to hold them up. Phase one, we did that again. That was one measure to address that lack of a public process. But a recommendation now is that temporary batch plans, that's why we split out on-site, off-site, and in the right-of-way with provisions. So there's, most of these are by right, just the off-site basically is what we're recommending for an SUP. We don't want to hinder that development either. So again, the distance requirements are based on the EPA Protection Act. I mentioned that already. We needed a basis, to come up with our distances. So we had precedence with some of our ordinances, and of course, we heard a lot of public input, and we're basing it on all of these factors. But TCEQ distance requirements for on-site equipment are the same. We're not proposing a change to that, but we are proposing the distance to the property lines for city regulations, again, based on what I've just mentioned. TCEQ is currently assessing their modeling of air contaminants under their rulemaking. Honestly, we've participated, several of us, as well as our commissioners have, of City Plan Commission have attended those meetings, as well as our chairwoman of the Environment and Sustainability Committee. And, they had some, just great input. We made sure that they were aware that, Dallas is very concerned about the air quality and the air monitoring and, just other issues. So, we don't know what's going to come out of the rulemaking. It sounded limited. So we'll just have to, but that'll be TCEQ's regulations. They have regulations now. They're separate from the city regulations. And, we'll move forward, and TCEQ's regulations are in our ordinance will be as amended. So, but they will need to be followed, obviously. Temporary batch plans, again, allowed by right in all districts except residential, if it's not, unless it's serving that site. And of course, they have, if they can meet all of the provisions, they can go in by right. So again, that's addressing the timing issue. We don't want the delays either. So renewals, we did hear a lot about renewals, of the permanent batch plants, especially, but we heard it for temporary as well. Temporary batch plants are already allowed up to 180 days. We've heard that. No definition of temporary batch plant, which we have one. We are revising definitions, but, that did need to be addressed and looked at. Our renewal process needs to provide accountability. That was a suggestion, absolutely. Should run with construction project it serves, and the project timeframe should be easily verified. No limited extensions. Then, and that was, we heard a lot of input. We heard no limited extensions, should only allow one extension. There were different numbers. Temporary batch plants should have to go back every 6 months. Define temporary batch plants. So what the recommendation is now is 2 renewals per the updated construction contract, or is determined by the SUP if an SUP is required. That's for temporary batch plants again. And then we have definitions, new definitions. And our temporary batch plant definition does include the 180-day time frame. And removal of equipment is part of that definition, as well as regulations. Renewals for the permanent batch plants. Again, we had a lot of feedback input from that. Batch plans, there's been a batch plant in Joppy that received a 20-year permit with a 10-year auto renewal. What message are we sending to our residents with these auto renewals? Without a public process and just letting them, just continue and having some issues with the facilities. We heard, of course, permanent facilities are quite an investment and should be able to prove their compliance. They should have a longer leash because there is quite a bit of an investment in a permanent facility. We heard, no auto renewals, put the burden on the operators, not the residents, for the batch plants, as far as notification and that process. Again, we heard a lot of different ideas. We heard they should have a 10-year approval cycle, but not less than 5 for renewals. They should demonstrate compliance and should have at least a 5-year renewal. A lot of discussion on this, of course, that, this is, these are a lot of times I think, it's difficult to come up with a one size fits all. So, our recommendation right now for a permanent batch plant is not to have a renewal process, basically. In other words, we're not putting a renewal time frame that they have to keep coming up for renewal, and unless it's imposed as part of, so no renewals basically unless it's imposed as part of the approved SUP. So in other words, that could be case by case, as part of the SUP, and that'll be basically the purview of, we'll have the public hearings, and it'll be ultimately the decision of our decision makers. So, that's basically what we're saying. And, we feel like there's a lot of measures in place as part of the proposal. And of course, we still have our measures in place, code enforcement, and we're doing a lot more. There's a lot more internal coordination now for the batch plants, and we'll have the checklist. We'll have a lot of checks and balances. We just feel like, sorry. There are a lot of measures in place now, we feel like, to assist in the process of making these, addressing the issues with respect to the sensitive land uses. So air quality issues, we did hear a lot about that, of course. So for both temporary and permanent batch plants, we heard there's a lack of focus on air quality. Dust is a problem. The environmental issues with respect to floodplain and watersheds. We heard we need more focus, obviously, on the air quality, not just water quality. Include the air quality data for health to city council. More consideration for environmental. We did hear no screening for temporary batch plants because that's not feasible. Address the cumulative impacts, and the sites need to be large enough. So again, on the air quality, we have a lot of provisions in place, and they're not all here. This is mainly to show you, what the issues, what the discussion was previously, suggestions, and how we feel that's being addressed. But we have a lot of additional provisions, and that is to address the air quality in the proposal. So we have the distances from sensitive land uses. We have a lot of dust suppression measures. We have ingress egress in and out of the site, not to be on residential streets, except of course if a temporary plant is serving a residential development and there's no other access. So trying to be reasonable, but also trying to have the protection. Screening and landscaping. The landscaping is for permanent facilities only, of course. We have site restoration and remediation as well, and other measures. That's just, some of them. we're proposing greater than or equal to 100 feet from a floodplain or floodway. We are going to provide the health data and studies to all of our boards and commissions and council. Cumulative impacts are being addressed, but again, between only one being allowed on the site and then the distance requirements as well. We are proposing some temporary screening requirements for the temporary batch plants, not permanent screening, of course. And then, we're proposing minimum 1 acre site requirements too, to address the size. We also heard that we need to think about infrastructure, consider a combination of vegetation and screening and lighting. Again, TCEQ requirements will still apply, because there was also we heard about TCEQ requiring a 12-foot fence when the stockpiles are not the appropriate distance away from the property line, then they have to do that option. So of course that still applies. Any TCEQ regulations still do apply, but we are recommending, if that doesn't come into play, we're still recommending screening for the permanent facilities, a minimum 8-foot tall screening fence. Again, unless TCEQ requirements stated to the left are not met, then they have to go with the 12 feet. But landscape buffers, 30 feet adjacent to streets, 20 adjacent otherwise, with some trees and shrubbery. We're recommending this infrastructure surfaces to be on a compacted subgrade and concrete or asphalt. No crushed or pervious surfaces are prohibited in places where vehicles are operated. That's for the permanent plants. And just slightly different for the temporary, where they have to be either that or a dust-proof surface and maintained as such. Same thing though, crushed or pervious surface prohibited in places where vehicles are operated. So again, a lot of that is to address the dust and the air quality emissions. We heard about property notification. It just wasn't big enough. So we had a lot of input on that. 200 to 4, raise the notification area, broaden it to 400 feet for the public, add in schools, homeowners associations, businesses, minimum 500 feet. Staff's recommending the public notification to go to 500 feet. And again, this is only if they have a specific use permit that's being required. So that is the permanent batch plants, of course. Notification to homeowners associations, public schools on record. We are recommending that match the same distance requirement as that respective batch plant category, meaning the 640 feet when that's applicable, the 1,320 when that's applicable, and the 3,281. So we are also suggesting through our application process and on our checklist that the applicants meet with the nearby property owners, the homeowners associations, the surrounding businesses, to address all the concerns and incorporate them into the site plan. Again, that's for SUPs only. And, that's to their benefit, because if they don't do that, they're going to risk a postponement anyway. They're going to be asked to do that. So if they do it up front, it just makes the process go a lot smoother and a lot faster. Signs posted on property, we didn't really hear that, but we are recommending some that we have information on the sign, the SUP number if there is one, and the expiration date of their certificate of occupancy. A lot of contact information for the operators responsible, and then just some fonts and consistency with legibility and with respect to how the signs are, the way they basically read, so that they are consistent. We heard about compliance issues, clear cutting of trees, no, renegade non-compliant plants, lack of focus on enforcement. We heard a lot about that. Get operators in compliance, change policies, codify some of TCEQ's requirements because they're not complying. Needs self-reporting checklists. City needs checklists beyond TCEQ's checklists to determine compliance. So clear cutting of trees, and it's not allowed in our landscape and tree preservation ordinance without the proper permits. Let me say it that way. It's not that you couldn't remove trees on a property, but there is a process that you have to go through and get approval through our landscape and tree preservation ordinance. So they can't just do it without the proper approvals. So that's an enforcement issue. We're asking you to, call 311 to report. They can investigate and look into it. Maybe they have the proper approvals, maybe they don't. Again, a lot of internal coordination with our applications, approvals, and noncompliance ongoing. It's already working. We're already, having a lot of that through the mapping and through this whole process and code amendment. Again, the checklist for intake, part of the internal process. Our checklist will require distances, whatever is ultimately decided on, as well as self-reporting violations and emissions incidents. All that's going to be put in the checklist to, for more checks and balances and reporting. So we will get that. Checklist, will require also a copy of the TCEQ application and any stormwater applications that are applicable through our stormwater division as well. So, we're getting a lot of information and just kind of a lot of coordination internally with our departments. Of course, we do have coordination with TCEQ as well, and we're hopeful that that's going to be even more so we'll be able to do that. And then, of course, we'll have our internal interactive dashboard map for better record keeping and analysis. So I'm sorry, this is lengthy. It's a lot of material, but we are forwarding our draft recommendation to our zoning ordinance advisory committee on December 13th. Of course, anyone on these notification lists, excuse me, that they're getting word about this that are on our contact list are going to get the agendas as always, along with the staff report ahead of time. But once ZOAC makes their recommendation, we'll forward that on to City Plan Commission, CPC, at the earliest available meeting, of course, and then whatever their recommendation is, it will ultimately go to the City Council for their final action if they so be grant that. Again, this just how to speak. I think Mike can recognize any hands up. If you want to raise the hand icon, type speak into, I'll show you where that is in a second, into the bottom here where it says, to host, if you want to put your name and address and say speak. I think, Mike can catch you pretty much anyway, but if you want to see who's in the meeting, I think probably y'all know how to do that. But if not, you can go here to participants and open that, or here, view all attendees, and you can see who's in this meeting right now. What's that? Sorry. So this is our contact information, and I don't know why I've changed this many times. I apologize. I don't know why, but I've changed the presentation to .gov, and I'm so sorry it's still showing up as .org. I'm not sure. Maybe I pulled up the wrong version, but it is Lori.Levy at dallas.gov. I apologize. And Sarah.May at dallas.gov as well. With that, we would love to hear from you. So, Mike, I don't know if we have anyone that would like to speak, but we'd love to hear any comments or thoughts from any of the participants.
I don't have any hands raised yet, and nothing in the chat, but feel free to join, raise a hand if you want to talk.
Anyone? And if you don't want to speak, in the meeting, that's fine. If you would like to just email directly, or something, after you think about it, if something comes up, a question, or anything, comment, if you want to just send it, email myself, like I said, or Sarah May, please feel free to do it that way. Otherwise, or, of course, you can sign up to speak for when that time comes. I guess it's probably next week, for the upcoming public hearing for the Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee. I, we suspect we'll have a lot of speakers. We did have a lot of participation. A lot of participants joined the meeting on Monday and Tuesday. So, we're anticipating that, and actually we're recommending that no decision, that a decision not necessarily be made, or a recommendation at that December 13th meeting before ZOAC. We know there's going to be a lot of speakers. It's going to be a lot of information. So we're already, we're going to ask that it just be held over, under advisement until the next meeting in January anyway. And then, once we get the input from our ZOAC committee, we'll have the ordinance language to bring forward to them at that time, or, anything else. So I did want to mention that. Anyone yet, Mike?
Yes, Commissioner Hampton has her hand raised.
Okay. Hi, Commissioner Hampton. Madam Chair Hampton and Commissioner Hampton.
No, thank you, Ms. Levy, Mr. King. I just wanted to thank y'all for hosting the meeting this morning, and I look forward to continuing the discussion on the 13th. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us for all the meetings. Thank you. Okay, well, we'll hang out, maybe even after 10, just in case. But thank you, everyone. But we'll just, like I said, we'll just hang out a little while, and if anything comes to you now, let us know. If not, like I said, feel free to send an email, and definitely sign up to speak, or just attend. You don't have to speak at the ZOAC meeting, but there'll definitely be more information and a little more detail.
I think that about wraps it up.
Okay. Did
Oh, wait.
I see a few in the meeting still? Jennifer and Derek Burgess.
Yeah, let me address. Katie had asked a question about a copy of the presentation. The presentation will be posted up to the website next week after the meeting on Monday or so. I don't think it'll be this. It definitely won't be this weekend. But we'll post presentation, and Katie, I think we'll try to email you a copy of that meeting presentation as well.
Also, I probably excuse me, the previous meetings would probably be posted before. One of them, the first one, may be posted now. And there might have been a slight change, between now and then, but if if that helps, I'm I believe Mondays is posted now. And it's just pretty much the same presentation for the most part. So, you know, for anyone who doesn't want to wait, or would just like to see it sooner, that's definitely one way to do it. And if you have trouble with that, just email me. If you want it sooner, I can get it to you sooner. I can just send it to you email via email. The video that's probably going to take a little bit longer. Oh, I'm sorry. I take that back. The Monday and Tuesday the presentation may already be on our website. It's the video. I'm sorry. The video, it takes a little bit longer. I believe Monday's video is already posted online, but it's going to take a little more time for Tuesday and probably quite a bit of time for this video to be posted. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining this morning. Thank you all for great input. That's we had. I'm sure a lot of you participated. Most of you did participate in the first series of public meetings, and we're very, very appreciative because we don't always get good, a lot of participation from our residents, and we had a lot of great participation, and that's it's a great process. This is what helps us. We want to make sure that we hear your input, and we're trying to address the input, and it's just vital, and it's extremely important to us. It's extremely important to our boards, commissions, and council. They want to know, they want to know what your issues are. They want to hear the input. So thank you so very much. I've enjoyed the public process. It's been great. So again, thank you very, very much for your time. I